In part 3 of our David Bowie singles rank, we take a look at Bowie's most successful and perhaps most inconsistent decade, the 1980s. Here we see Bowie start the decade strong with the experimental art rock of the Scary Monsters album, score the biggest hits of his career with Let's Dance, before drifting into a creative and critical wasteland with Tonight and Never Let Me Down. Before we start, it's worth mentioning that these are all subjective, it's our opinions. If you disagree, just let us know in the comment section below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this decade. Also, in terms of the rankings, it's all done relatively, so we're only looking at the 80s here. We're not saying that an A+ from 1981 is the same as an A+ from 1971. At the end of the series, what we'll do is we'll look at all of the A+ songs and we'll kind of put them in context against each other so that we can see where they rank in the whole Bowie catalogue, and maybe come up with a list of the best Bowie singles ever released. As with our other rankings, we won't be doing live singles or songs that weren't widely released. We also won't be covering Tin Machine, but let us know in the comments section below if you'd like us to do a Tin Machine rank. The third single from the album of the same name, Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, is a relentless piece of art rock. Bowie was starting the decade off in a strong position, with critically acclaimed singles such as this one being equally commercially successful. This is a very good song, and Bowie was starting the 80s off in a very strong position, but in my opinion it isn't quite as good as the other singles from this album, so I've given it an A. Featuring weird time signature changes and producer Tony Visconti's frantic acoustic guitar strumming, Up the Hill Backwards is the kind of off-kilter and challenging hit that only an artist like David Bowie could pull off. It's rightfully often heralded as one of his finest songs, and it's certainly a highlight of the Scary Monsters album. In a funny way, it's more pop than Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, even though it's such a weird song. I think I'll give this an A star. There are a few collaborations that match the brilliance of Queen and David Bowie's Under Pressure, which is why Rolling Stone readers rank this song as the best duet ever recorded. Under Pressure started off as a jam session based around a chord progression that Queen had already demoed. However, according to Brian May, Bowie introduced the now iconic bass line and wrote the majority of the song's lyrics, and practically locked Queen members out in the recording studio while he mixed and edited the song. Stunning social commentary and equally stunning vocals from Freddie Mercury make this an A star. The 1975 recording of Wild as the Wind was released as a single to promote the 1981 compilation Changes to Bowie. It's a fantastic cover, perhaps Bowie's best, and would go on to become one of the last songs that he'd ever perform live, opening the 9th November 2006 set at the Hammerstein Ballroom. The first and probably the best of two versions of the song Cat People, this 1982 single was recorded for the erotic horror film of the same name. Unlike the album version, the soundtrack version is an atmospheric rocker that builds into a crescendo of guitar and synthesizer, while the version later released on the Let's Dance album is faster and more raucous, filled with guitar soloing by Stevie Ray Vaughan. I also think that the soundtrack version has a better vocal performance, owing mostly to the arrangement, which gives Bowie a lot more space to perform. Bowie's Christmas song, and another duet, this time with legendary crooner Bing Crosby. The song is fine and not as overplayed as most Christmas songs, and I like the story that Bowie didn't actually like the song, so they added the Peace on Earth counter melody just to satisfy him. The big problem with the song, however, is the audio itself. With the original tapes wiped, RCA chose instead to release the broadcast version, which isn't the best in terms of sound quality, and probably was the final straw that made Bowie switch to EMI Records. When Bowie went into the studio to record Let's Dance, his one instruction to producer Nile Rodgers was to turn the title track into a hit. According to Rodgers, Let's Dance started life as a folky acoustic song comprising of just two chords. Seeing the potential in the song, Rodgers asked Bowie if he himself could handle the arrangement, and he transformed the song into a unique blend of funk, rock and pop. As Niall has said, they ended up creating a song that nobody has stopped dancing to since. With Nile Rodgers' help, Bowie transformed this tortured Iggy Pop song about American imperialism and doomed love into a hit. While this new version lacks the punk edge of the original, it's probably the best ever cover of an Iggy Pop song, although Bowie does have a writing credit for the music. Many Bowie fans cite Modern Love as the best single on Let's Dance, and it's easy to see why. It's upbeat and catchy, but at the same time complex and artistic, with its jazz horns, boogie-woogie piano, and lyrics questioning the relationship between God and man, and a general critique of organised religion. It's probably my favourite track on Let's Dance, so I've given it an A star. The Tonight album is considered by many to be a cash grab following the international success of Let's Dance. Consisting of mostly covers, with only 2 songs being credited to Bowie alone, the album would become a commercial success while gathering a mixed critical reaction. Blue Jean, one of the 2 Bowie originals, is one of the strongest tracks on the album. It reinvents rock and roll for a 1980s audience, taking formulaic rock chord sequences and themes and blending them seamlessly with 80s production. The Tonight album's title track is perhaps one of the most bizarre covers of Bowie's career. Co-written with Iggy Pop for his Lust for Life album, Tonight started life as a pastiche of the teen tragedy genre popular in the 50s and 60s. However, in this updated 70s attempt, the lover dies of a heroin overdose. Bowie cut out the song's introduction, which originally featured Iggy setting the scene by describing his lover as turning blue and on the edge of death, updated the music to reggae, and enlisted Tina Turner to duet with him. Although it's certainly different, it isn't by any stretch of the imagination a good cover, and it saw Bowie score his lowest UK chart position since 1977's Be My Wife. Perhaps Bowie's most underrated collaboration, This Is Not America is the first in a series of songs Bowie wrote for soundtracks. Like most of these, except of course Labyrinth, the films have slipped into obscurity, with Bowie's contributions being the main reason for their notoriety. This Is Not America combines Pat Metheny and Lyle May's music with some of Bowie's most profound lyrics. It's easily one of Bowie's best 80s singles, and perhaps the most underrated, which is why it gets an A from me. The other original song from the Tonight album, Loving the Alien, is perhaps the only song that stands up to the greatness of Bowie's earlier work. It's perhaps the best lyrics he'd composed since the Scary Monsters album, and stands ahead of all of the other tracks on Tonight. Bowie himself, however, was the song's biggest critic, saying that he hated the production, preferring the much more stripped-back demo. For the 2003 reality tour, Bowie performed the song with an acoustic arrangement, which is probably the ultimate version and closest to how Bowie wanted the original song to sound. Originally recorded to raise money for Live Aid, this over-the-top and campy cover fueled rumours about Bowie and Jagger's relationship, and has been called the gayest music video of all time by Family Guy. On the other hand, it has also been heralded the 8th best collaboration of all time by Rolling Stone, and the #1 song the British public wanted to play at street parties celebrating the 2011 royal wedding of Kate Middleton and Prince William. That said, comparing the song with every other single that Bowie released in this list, it's probably the worst. In the mid-80s, Bowie did a lot of work creating songs for movie soundtracks. Most of the movies weren't actually very good, and Absolute Beginners is no exception. But one of the best things about the film is this theme song. The song eventually became more critically praised and commercially successful than the film itself, and that's understandable, as it's a pretty decent song. I've given it a B, but it's borderline, and on a good day, I might even give it an A. Part of the Labyrinth soundtrack, Underground is a very 80s sounding song and hasn't aged at all well in comparison to Bowie's other 80s output. It was a weird choice for a single from the Labyrinth soundtrack, and I think everyone is kind of in agreement that Magic Dance would have made the better single. Yet another soundtrack song, When the Wind Blows, has always struck me as the most un-Bowie sounding single he ever released. Switching between heavy guitars and 80s balladry, with interesting chord and time signature changes, the song is complex and compelling. I think it's often forgotten and significantly underrated. Listening to it back now, I'd forgotten how much I actually liked this song. The first track from the much maligned Never Let Me Down album isn't actually that bad. In fact, I'd go as far as saying that it's an underrated Bowie song that's easily among the best he released in this period. The lyrics concern a young mother doing all she can to feed her child, in a message that criticised the US treatment of the homeless, and the music video contained scenes in which homeless people urinated on the Hollywood Walk of Fame star for Ronald Reagan, which obviously led to the music video being censored. Where the song fails is that it dresses up a serious subject as a dance hit, and the production now sounds very dated, particularly compared to the timeless pop of Let's Dance and the sophisticated edge of Scary Monsters. Again, Time Will Crawl is a great song on a not-so-good album. The lyrics are apocalyptic and were inspired by the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster, as well as general destruction of nature through industrialization. In my opinion, it's probably the best song on Never Let Me Down, and Bowie's only great single of the late 80s. The song benefited from a 2008 remix which replaced a lot of the programmed instruments with real ones, which also brought the sound up to date compared to the original's typical 80s production. Bowie liked the result of the remix so much that he instructed its producer, Mario McNulty, to reimagine the entire Never Let Me Down album. And if you haven't heard that, go check it out, as it really shows that Never Let Me Down was pretty good songwriting, plagued by 1980s production. The title track to the Never Let Me Down album has aged quite well, and it's easy to see why critics at the time heralded it as one of the best songs on the album. The success of this song is perhaps in its stripped-back approach. Unlike the rest of Never Let Me Down, the title track doesn't suffer from overblown, messy 80s production elements such as synthesizers and gated drums. This would be Bowie's last charting single in the US until 2015's Lazarus, and the last new solo single he'd release until 1992's Real Cool World, which we'll be talking about in a couple of weeks' time when we release our video about the 1990s period. So if you're interested in that, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out. Included in this list, just because we're running from 81 to the end of the decade, is Fame 90, a single that was released to coincide with the Sound and Vision tour. This is a fine remix, but I think it's completely unnecessary and in no way an essential Bowie release. It's low effort and it's just not as good as the original, so I've given it a D. So, how did we do? Did we get anything wrong? Let us know in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe for the next episode when we'll be talking about the 1990s.